What I want to do in this lesson is start to unpack what is considered to be the most important, some might say even the cornerstone of Kant's deontological ethics. This is known as his categorical imperative, and this is going to form part of our series on normative ethics, looking specifically at the concept of Kantian ethics. So this is arguably the most foundational of Kant's normative ethical theory. Now, whereas the concept of deontology and the concept of autonomy and human rationality provides something of a theoretical framework and a theoretical foundation for what ultimately is determinative to be his deontological ethics, his normative ethical theory, it is Kant's categorical imperative that provides the more pragmatic and therefore, as such, the more practical application of normative ethics to applied ethical situations. So, the previous lesson when we looked at and we spoke about rationality, autonomy, and all this kind of thing, and deontology, you might be thinking, this is great, this is a lovely way of grounding a normative ethical principle. But how am I able to actually apply this to actual ethical conundrums like business ethics or sexual ethics or the rights to an abortion or genetic engineering and all these different kinds of applied ethical principles? I can't just talk about human rationality and capacity and autonomy. I have to actually have a foundational system for which I'm able to apply my ethical principles. That's what the categorical imperative seeks to do. So, as a result of this, the categorical imperative is actually a very central and fundamental principle. For him, it is a principle for determining moral duty and the morality of actions. Now, the categorical imperative is fundamentally just a collection of formulations, sometimes known as maxims. Formulations which each provide a different perspective on how moral principles should be both formulated and established, and then universally applied. So, the categorical imperative, being made up of a variety of different formulations, therefore provides for us various different standards, various different tests for which we can actually input a number of applied ethical positions, and you would get an output that Kant would essentially adhere to. And so with this being in mind, the basic formulations are divided into three distinct categories. There is the maxim of universalization or universality. There is the principle of ends and humanity, sometimes known as the humanity principle. And then there is the kingdom of ends principle. Beginning first then with the universalization principle. Kant says, quote, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will be that it should become a universal law. Essentially what this formulation does is it emphasizes the idea that moral principles or maxims, maxims and formulations must be capable of being applied both consistently and universally without leading to logical contradictions. So, in other words, if an action is morally permissible according to the various standards of normative ethics that you are applying, according to the universalization formula, you can then generalize that principle to apply to everyone in similar situations without creating inconsistencies and contradictions. Kant does not recognize, he fundamentally does not recognize the view that there could be theoretically principles which are, or actions and maxims which are guiding and are moral in some circumstances, but are immoral in other circumstances. The next formulation is, as I've noted, known as the humanity formulation. This is, and I quote from Kant, quote, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end and never merely as a means. Essentially, what this formulation does is provide us guidance as to the ways in which we should be prioritizing dignity and the inherent worth of human beings. What it essentially allows for us to do and requires of us is that individuals must always be treated as an end in themselves, rather than being manipulated and solely utilized for the benefit of achieving some other goal, i.e. never as a means to an end. Instead, individuals must be respected as autonomous agents capable of making rational choices, and in that similar vein, they should have the ability to be able to pursue their own ends. You are doing a fundamental disservice to a person if you utilize them as a means towards your own end, because what you are doing is essentially undermining their ability to make rational choices and pursue their own ends and their own justifications as autonomous agents. That is what is considered to be an immoral act, according to Kant. The final formulation is known as the kingdom of ends formulation, and it says, quote, act as if you were, through your maxims, a lawmaking member of a kingdom of ends. What does this mean? Well, essentially what this does is it applies the idea of universalizability, the first formulation. And essentially what Kant is asking us to do is he is inviting us to engage in a hypothetical kingdom or a hypothetical community. And within this community, we are rational beings who legislate moral laws, and we are doing so on the basis of principles of duty and reason. And it is within this kingdom of ends that individuals are both lawmakers and that they are both subjects to the law themselves, and by extension they are guided by the moral laws which essentially endorse and rubber stamp the ability of human beings to both be rational and to both be autonomous. And it is within this line of argumentation, therefore, that you should engage in this hypothetical thought experiment, and you should engage in it as if you were a member of the kingdom of ends. You are the member of this lawmaking, rational, this rational society which is guided by moral laws. And if you do so, you should act as though you were firstly not treating people as a means to an end, but that you are also universalizing principles as well. So that's what each of these considerations essentially tell us. Let's look at how this is actually applied in the day-to-day, shall we? And the example that is always utilized and always cited, I'm not actually sure if it's cited by Kant himself. I'm pretty sure it might be at various different stages in his writings. Principally groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, obviously. The example that is often always used is the maxim that we see here, the proposition that I will lie whenever it benefits me. Okay, that is the ethical scenario that I want to engage with. How would Kant deal with that particular question? How will Kant deal with whether or not that particular stance, whether that particular position is moral or immoral? Well, according to the first formulation, the universalization formulation, if anyone was to adopt this stance, it must therefore be the case that everyone should follow this maxim as well. They must follow this maxim. Truthfulness and trustworthiness then becomes impossible to achieve because no one would believe each other. So according to a universalizability formulation, this is already on shaky grounds, given that it cannot be permissible because it cannot be universalized. So lying cannot be morally permissible under the formulation, the first of these formulations, because it cannot be consistently universalized without undermining the very concept of truth. Under the second formulation, under the second maxim, the means and ends maxim, this proposition, I will lie whenever it benefits me, would rely on the use of exploitation and coercion of individuals for personal gain, because you are only going to be lying when it benefits you. By lying, you are telling a mistruth, and by telling a mistruth, you are essentially depriving of that person who you are lying to the ability for them to act as rational and autonomous agents in achieving their own ends. So you're using coercion and exploitation for personal gains, and that this would essentially violate the humanity principle, because it will treat people merely as a means to an end. You're treating somebody as a means to an end because you are lying to somebody for your own benefit. The means to an end is getting the benefit that you want. And in doing so, you are therefore disrespecting the autonomy and the inherent value of an individual. And then finally, we can think about the third formulation, the idea of imagining and acting as if we were in a kingdom of ends that would be applying this principle all the time, universally. Imagine a society where everybody respects others' rights and dignities, where there are moral laws that are based on principles that we all accept, and they're based on autonomous, rational agency. Okay, could you imagine in that kind of society a situation where it would be moral for you to consider the maxim, "I will lie whenever it benefits me"? This final formulation encourages individuals to act in ways which contributes to the establishment of a society on the basis of mutual respect and recognition and rational cooperation, which is something that would fundamentally stand in stark contrast with the proposition, "I will lie whenever it benefits me." So, using the example here and applying the three maxims, we can come to a very substantial conclusion that lying would therefore be immoral in any circumstance in and of itself, according to Kant.